we just had a quick review of your district code of conduct. There's a few things that came up there. Very punitive, so a lot of discretion up to administration on a lot of different behaviors to suspend, expel, and school suspension. So being clear about what is our practice here at Meade, when are we engaging in those behaviors, and maybe what are some more restorative practices that we can engage in. Looking at what you might want to add to your action plan. We talked about who at Meade participates at the district level conversation about this, and since your middle school and high school are already PBIS trained, have they looked at this code of conduct now that Ansonia is moving in this more positive framework? Have they looked at this code of conduct to align it with their work around PBIS? And also ensuring that there is context of the student. So I had a nice little side conversation about students with special needs, or a student that has a behavior support plan. Are they being held to the same level if it's written in their behavior support plan on how we're reacting to these behaviors, yet they're defiant and running out of the classroom, and the code of conduct says I can give them an in-school suspension for that? Are we holding them punitive in the same way, or are we following their behavior support plan? So ensuring that there's some training around that, some knowledge about that, and some buy-in around that. So those are action step items that you may want to add, and something that we might need to go back to and talk about. So again, this beautiful guideline slide this afternoon, when you get this sheet to help you with action planning, you'll have this same slide. I think this is really important as far as thinking about your definitions. And you guys have already worked on this. So you came up with your ODR form, you came up with those major and minor behaviors, you wrote some descriptions on what those are, definitions of what those are. Before lunch, we're going to do an activity looking at your Swiss. Missy and I quickly did that, and I think there's going to be some clarity that's needed. I think of that last bullet point there of mutually exclusive with minimal overlap. I call them the 3 Ds: defiance, disrespect, and disruption. There's often a lot of gray area there. And I believe when we were looking at your data, there were some that are marking off defiance, there's some that are marking off disrespect, and then their description, very similar type behaviors. So how can we clarify that? And if there is a lot of overlap, do we need all 3 of them, or are we merging some of them, to being clear around our definition? And if there's real clarity around knowing I'm sending a student down, or I'm filling out this form for this behavior, I clearly know what that behavior is. That goes to that measurable term. I'm going to say observable as well. Have we defined our behaviors in measurable and observable ways? So a teacher knows exactly what they're looking at, so they're not making judgment, they're not making assumptions, they are filling out the form based on an observation. And what else did I want to highlight here? Again, it's important for clarity around staff for them to understand this definition, but also important for students. So we always say the ODR form is not the consequences. If staff are saying, I'm going to give an ODR for that, that's not what we are trying to preach here. The ODR form is not the consequence, but students should understand what those behavior definitions are as well. So if a teacher's saying you're being disrespectful, what is disrespectful? So that goes to that clarity around that. Looking at your procedures for processing violations of school-wide expectations, you've developed a flow chart of what is office managed and what is classroom managed. I'm going to go over a couple examples in a little bit about clarity around that, because I think from just the staff meeting that we were at and some of the dialogue that I've heard so far today, there might be some confusion of, do I fill out a minor for this, do I handle it in my classroom, or do I send it to an office? And I want to say, when I was looking at your data, there seemed to be a couple teachers that are like filling out tons of them, which isn't bad and probably makes sense for this quick rollout that we did. But how do we ensure that they feel equipped to what's handled in their classroom, and do they need to fill out a form for it or not? So I have, there's some good examples on clarity around that. But there needs to be agreement among staff of what we handle in our classrooms and what we send to the office. So real clarity with your flow chart. Looking at your ODR form to ensure that you have all of those pieces, I will say that you do, because you are Swiss compatible, so you guys worked really hard on that. That was like in October, November that we worked on really firming up your ODR form. The piece that I want to say that we're going to probably have to go back to is that D2 was the possible motivation. That takes staff training. It's about that function of behavior. And I think on some of them there was like a confusion, or maybe a box checked in the little notes was like, I'm not really sure. And that's okay if you're not really sure, but we want folks to take the best stab, and we also want them to start getting in this mindset of the ABCs, the antecedents, the behavior and the consequence. So what happened? What was the observable piece that happened each of the in that incident, to ensure they understand that possible motivation. Time of day, thank you, Misty, for that reminder. There were a few referrals that were happening like before school starts here, so I'm not sure if that's a data entry issue, so we'll talk about fidelity of data entry during that Swiss activity as well, but looking at ensuring what you're writing for time of day and whoever's entering it, to ensure they have that data. And what's happening if whoever's entering the data is getting an incomplete form, how are we handling that? So we'll talk about that before lunch as well.
Some of the ones that are before school were like bus issues. So that's some of them, but not all.
And I think we checked for that, and those, there
It's
was
7
a few
o'clock.
that were, and it didn't list the location off as bus.
Okay, then we'll have to look at it.
But we'll look at them, and that's okay, because those things happen, and that's part of this, like, let's try this out for a year before we officially roll out next year, looking at all of that. And then Missy, after I finish up this step, is gonna really look at data decision rules for intervention and support. So how do we use the data to make decisions? Again, I know there's been this request for, we need some support for our tier 2 and tier 3 students. Again, you're not gonna neglect those students and not do what you need to do, but it'll be much easier to decide what interventions we're gonna plan for if we have good data to plan for those interventions, and come up with clear decision rules about who accesses tier 2, when are we red flagging the kid and bringing them to an intervention team to decide they might need support. But we need the data to help inform what those practices are going to be. So this is the example that I was giving that I think might be helpful for some of your staff, on what is a warning and a reteach, what's a minor offense, what's a major offense, and what are those expected behaviors. So I remember in your staff meeting, some folks were saying, like, I'm gonna have to write up every time a student does that. And we say, well, if you give a correction and a student responds to your correction, like, you've done like the warning and the reteach. No. But I think it might be helpful for some, especially around some of those confusing terms, maybe defiance, disrespect, disruption, or some of those behaviors as we look through your data, some murky gray area, on what's something that's classroom handled and as a warning or a reteach that you're not going to fill out your ODR form, and what's actually a minor offense that you're going to fill out the minor form for, and what's actually the major offense that you're going to send to the office. So I think this helps kind of really clarify a teacher feeling like, I'm handling this in my classroom and I don't need to fill a form out for this. I'm handling it in my classroom, but I need to document it because this is actually something that could lead to other behaviors, and I need to fill out this form because I need to send the student to the office. So some real clarity around that. Any questions, or do you feel like this could be helpful to staff?
I like this column.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of teachers, honestly a lot, some teachers feel like they have to write everything up.
Yep.
And when I try to clarify, no, you don't have to write everything up, because otherwise that's all you would do is spend your time doing everything here. It's those times where, you know, you really want to just, it's more, the minor offense could just be simply like a tracking, you know, I just want to document this. Like, this was more than the usual, and knock it off. But it's not to the point where they want us to get involved as administrators.
Exactly. I've given 3 warnings, and now that's a minor offense.
So
I
those are
think-
minor, okay, so we just, do you put that on the form, like, do you put that, you know?
So if you're doing any of this, just this reteaching, just quick, like, hey,
Right.
knock it off, stop, no documentation,
No,
you're just
no
saying,
form, I know, okay.
So that's where I think you're going to have to think, thank you, John, for that. And there's 2 pieces that I want to highlight there. One is some staff might be not clear on, do I write up everything? And some are like writing up nothing. So we want all staff to be real clear about what we're writing up and what we're not writing up. And that goes to that kind of staff agreement. We are all on the same page about how we are using our ODR form and feel confident in how to use it. It might take us a little while to get there, so don't like freak out now. The other piece that I heard is some clarity, and it's almost like that decision rule. How many warnings do I give before it's a minor offense? So maybe making that real clear. Is it 2 or more warnings is a minor offense? But we need to also clearly define what is a warning or what is a reteach.
No, I was just saying, like, it made sense to me in one of the earlier meetings when we said the reason that you even write up the ODR forms might be to help the kid next year. Because you sit there and you say, like, you know, how did you handle it? Well, this kid now in 4th grade is having all these issues, and you sit there and you say, well, there was no, before this policy, there was no, like, evidence, or there was no data, like, I never, we're not big to send them to the office, so, well, then how did you handle it? At least this helps the kid next year to see what worked for them.
So Missy, you're tying back to that graphic of the outcomes, data, assistive practices. We're looking at the outcomes for the student. So you want to set up that student best way you can for next year. So this data piece will help set that student up for success.
See,
Because
that's
we'll
the
have
thing,
some
the data is the
documentation.
thing, yeah.
And then this data is also going to help us inform what interventions or what practices do we need to tweak or change for that student. Is it maybe they need their own individual teach of these expectations? If the whole class teach is not enough and they need some reinforcement, do they maybe need a tier 2 support? Do they need their own behavior check sheet, maybe a check-in, check-out type thing? So you're exactly right, Missy, that this is going to help outcomes for students, and it's going to help us use data to inform practices. So you can have some chocolate.
Yes, chocolate for you.
This is another example. This one has some of the defiance there. It's that same thing. What is, so the top column didn't get put on here, but what is a read teacher warning, what's a minor, what's a major, and what's the expectation? Again, just like there's a continuum of consequences, there's a continuum of behavior. So when we define it, what I think you've currently done is define it in very one concrete way. We might need to really define it in a much more, in a level that makes much more sense to teachers. So what am I giving a warning for? What am I filling out the form for minors and majors? So just some clarity around that. So this example kind of helps that layered approach. So your guidelines for implementation procedures, we just talked about this, use by all staff. So John's mentioned, I think Tom's mentioned, when you're pulling up your Swiss data right now, there might be staff who are filling it out like all the time, probably spending hours after school filling them out. And there's some staff that aren't using it. We need to have consistent use of the ODR form. Everybody having an understanding of how to use that. That previous example, I think, will help clarify some of that. We need to be regularly reviewing the use and effectiveness. So I think you're already doing that with some of that data team with the UA folks who are getting together looking at your Swiss data. Tom, you said questions are coming, so that means that you're already doing some review and effectiveness. You have a means of keeping track of your ODR firms. You're using Swiss, but when you talk about that acknowledgement system that you set up, how are you going to track data on acknowledgements? Remember, we're looking for this 4-to-1 ratio of 4 acknowledgements to every correction happening in a classroom. How are we trying to track that with our acknowledgements and our ODRs? That might be something that's going to take some work. I'm seeing some faces and nods and smiles. So how are we going to encourage staff to buy into our acknowledgement system and buy into our ODR? So I will say there's some folks that love filling out an ODR form, but aren't so big on acknowledging or reinforcing behaviors. How are we going to ensure that there's a balance that's happening? What guidelines are we going to set up? And there's different ways you can do that. I'm going to show you an example on the next page. But some of it is just making it easy for staff. So I had a conversation last week with a team who said that their acknowledgement form was just too tricky. They had to fill out the student name, their grade, their homeroom, the teacher's name. They had to check off which expectation the student was meeting, and that was just time intensive. So teachers weren't filling out acknowledgement slips because there was just too much writing that needed to happen. Another school said they moved to a very simple system where students were just earning like raffle tickets, so they didn't have to fill out anything on them, but they were color coded, so I knew if it was a classroom teacher gave it versus a support staff who gave it, so they were able to kind of track who is giving acknowledgements. Some is just making it accessible, so I don't know, it doesn't look like you guys have to wear badges, but if you do, like making them part of your slips that can go right in. Oh, you have one on.
I wear mine now.
Nice.
From the middle school.
I was living right now. I was in a school where they had pockets.
See, now everybody's bringing theirs out. They're all legal, they have it.
It's not even mine.
I turned over that you
It's
didn't
the
face your
social work.
picture.
It's Chris Kachici's underneath there.
It's funny, so it's not even you on your
Yeah,
back.
It works.
So what are some other strategies that you can encourage staff to be giving out giving out more acknowledgements than ODRs?
So my old school actually had something, we were the Wildcats, we had cat cards, so we had a positive on one side and a negative on the other, and you had one for every kid. And once they got, like, they had to spell out, like, positive, and each letter had something. And when they did, they got a positive referral that, like, so they went to the principal, and the principal called home with the student sitting there, and it was a positive call home from the principal, and they got, like, a little something. But on the other side, it wasn't for referrals, it was just to track, like, those everyday little behaviors. And so once you got to 3 of the same behavior, that's when you made a phone call home, because clearly they're doing it 3 days in a row, even though it's not escalating to like a minor referral form or anything like that.
So a good piece there that I want to highlight, one is student buy-in and having some student responsibility in that. So when you think about your school here, from pre-K to 6, you have a wide developmental range, but could those 5th and 6th graders be tracking some of this
Yeah,
data?
that's where it was in their agenda.
I was
So,
gonna say, where'd you keep
yeah,
It was in their agenda, so they had to have their agenda and it was always in their agenda.
So when we go back to